From Captain America's red, white, and meh to Iron Fist's best Chippendale impression, let's check out the oddest MCU costume choices. By 2017, the Marvel Cinematic Universe could seemingly do no wrong, considering the massive success achieved by largely obscure characters like Ant-Man and the Guardians of the Galaxy. Marvel Studios decided to bring the Inhumans to the big screen. However, plans changed, and they were shuffled over to the small screen in the form of an 8-episode miniseries. Still, the studio had struck gold with its shared universe of Netflix series and ABC's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so what could go wrong here? As it turns out, pretty much everything. Inhumans was absolutely destroyed by critics and fans alike who ridiculed almost every aspect of the show, from the characterization, to the story, to the tone, and more. But even before the series was unleashed on an unsuspecting public, one aspect was singled out: the suits. As soon as an official still from the series was released, social media users ripped costume designs to pieces like a pack of hungry piranha. Their disgust was understandable. Before Inhumans, Marvel Studios had largely spared no expense when it came to visualizing characters for live action. But what we got here was not of the same standard. Actor Jordan Ross took to X, formerly known as Twitter, to joke about how the cosplay looked great. Captain America has gone through multiple costumes in the MCU, many of which were inspired by the looks he sported throughout the decades in the comics. The very first suit he donned in Captain America: The First Avenger was intentionally cheesy and dated, paying tribute to his 1940s comic book introduction. However, once he got fed up with selling war bonds and decided to join the war effort, Cap opted for something more rugged, similar to what he wore in the Ultimates comics. While on the run from the authorities after his fallout with Iron Man in Civil War, Cap adorned himself with a darker style, reflecting his nomad persona. And it was in Avengers Endgame that he finally donned the iconic scale mail he'd been wearing since his earliest comic days. However, there's one Captain America costume that fans weren't happy with: the one he wore in the first Avengers movie. Within the movie, S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Phil Coulson claims that he had a hand in its design, and considering his deep love for Cap, it's completely fair to put the blame squarely on him for the annoyingly cartoony appearance. Marvel Studios is often blamed for making its heroes' costumes too busy and grounded in an attempt to make them more practical. However, this iteration of Cap's suit saw the studio commit the exact opposite sin.
I understood that reference.
Adam Warlock is another Marvel Comics character who's been relatively unknown to mainstream audiences. Mostly relegated to the cosmic side of the comic book universe, Adam is a being who was synthetically created to be the next step in human evolution. He also plays a major role in such beloved storylines as The Infinity Gauntlet and Annihilation Conquest. The character made his live-action debut in 2023's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, played by Will Poulter. In the film, he's the creation of Aisha, who sends him to get revenge on the Guardians, only for him to end up as a member of the team. The MCU version of Adam Warlock borrows much of his backstory from the comics, which is also the source of his costume's red and gold color scheme. However, in true Marvel fashion, his suit is given far too much detail in the form of tactical armor, replacing the traditional superhero spandex. Fans weren't terribly fond of the militaristic stylings given to the character, who was historically so powerful that he didn't need additional padding to bulk him up. At least the film's costume designers kept his cape and forehead gem. It's rather humorous how everyone thought a crystal embedded in someone's skull wasn't too weird, but red underwear somehow crossed the line. The Eternals were never anyone's favorite characters, mostly due to the fact that they occupied such a small place in the Marvel Comics pantheon. Other than a handful of dedicated series, the race of humanoid space gods appeared only sporadically in other titles since comic book legend Jack Kirby created them in the 1970s. On its surface, bringing such obscure characters to the big screen was a bold move on Marvel Studios' part, but since they were riding high on the gargantuan success of Avengers Endgame, who could blame them for taking such a risk? Well, it turns out that their risk didn't pay off. The film received a mixed reaction from audiences, due in no small part to its predictable plot and boring characters. Of course, the Eternals' bland fashion sense did little to make them stand out from the rest of the MCU's growing roster of heroes. As one Reddit user pointed out, at some point you really start to notice how a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe's costumes just feel the same. Whether your character is an alien god, a space pirate, or just a human billionaire, you all shop at the same outlet. One would hope that immortal gods who have been around since the birth of humanity would be treated with a little more respect.
You like the costume?
We need to talk.
Tell the director I have some notes
We
for
need
him.
to talk to you in private.
Following the fairly positive response to the previous Marvel shows on Netflix, Iron Fist was released in 2017 to a considerably less enthusiastic reception. Despite a handful of decent action scenes, fans and critics largely balked at the show's wandering storyline, weak performances, and lack of a strong villain. In short, it made for a middling lead-in to The Defenders, which was Marvel Television's attempt to recreate the crossover magic of the Avengers film on the small screen. The show may have scored more points with audiences if its protagonist wore his famous green and yellow costume from the comics. Instead, he wore regular street clothes, which did nothing to garner favor with fans of the source material. Sure, the Netflix versions of the characters were more gritty and down to earth, but that doesn't mean the show's creators couldn't have done something more with it. Danny Rand's on-screen look felt like a slap in the face to many who followed the character for years and waited patiently for a live-action iteration. As CBR's Sean Aitchison wrote, although there was an in-story justification for the absence of Danny's costume, it still felt like a pretentious rejection of Iron Fist's comic roots. If not for his chest tattoo and his glowing fists, it would be impossible to realize that Danny was actually the immortal Iron Fist. Whiplash from Iron Man 2 is sort of a composite of the comic book character of the same name and the Crimson Dynamo, both of whom were longtime nemeses of Tony Stark. In the film, Whiplash is Ivan Vanko, the son of a Russian scientist who worked with Tony Stark's father decades earlier, before getting kicked out of the US for illegally selling advanced technology. Either Ivan doesn't know that his father was a criminal, or he doesn't care here. He sets out to get revenge on Stark, believing that the best way to do that is arm himself with some dangerous tech. Whiplash's first attempt to take down Iron Man is a little short in the style department, as he attacks wearing bright orange pants, a couple of electrical whips, and that is it. Other than the whips, nothing about it is based on his comic book counterparts, but fans would have been more forgiving of it if it had led to something greater later. It did not. Instead, we got a bland, bulky ripoff of an Iron Man suit whose only saving grace is that it is barely in the film. As Hamilton Parker wrote for comicbookmovie.com, his final appearance, which received a laughably short amount of screen time, is so generic that it's hard to remember what Whiplash even looked like when he finally donned his own suit of armor. Deathlok was never an A-list Marvel Comics character, but having been around since the 1970s, he's had enough of an audience to justify his appearances over the years. Many characters have taken on the Deathlok identity, but the main qualities they've all shared are that they were once dead humans who were revived with advanced technology and given an arsenal of deadly cybernetic weapons. The style most associated with Deathlok is that of a corpse-like figure with futuristic armor and half their face covered in deadly machinery. It's a pretty heavy metal look that's reminiscent of the T-800 from the Terminator films, so there was a precedent when it came to realizing this character in live-action form. Unfortunately, Deathlok's grand live-action debut on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. left fans wanting more. In fact, a lot more. In the show, he is a regular man named Mike Peterson who was turned into a cyborg with expensive high-tech abilities by Hydra experimentation. Hydra apparently had its funding cut, so they outfitted Peterson with plastic armor that made him look like a Power Rangers villain. Viewers do get the occasional glimpse of his metallic interior, but it feels like they pulled back to ground the character more. Baron Zemo is a longtime Captain America villain and a high-ranking Hydra leader who always shows up with a different plan to conquer the world. His MCU counterpart is quite a bit different. Zemo first appeared in Captain America Civil War as a Sokovian soldier who blames the Avengers for his family's death after their battle with Ultron devastated their country. He returns in the Disney Plus series The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, in which he's recruited to help track down the Flag Smashers. Zemo donned two outfits that failed to do his iconic comic book look justice. Civil War mostly sees him wearing regular clothes, prompting many fans to wonder why he was even in the film, as he was such a departure from the way he's portrayed in the source material. For the Disney Plus series, he eventually puts on a purple mask that brings him a little closer to his original look, but it's only for one scene and did little to thrill fans with enthusiastic recognition. Marvel's failure to recreate the villain's suit was pointed out by Game Rant's Adeola Adeoye, who wrote, "Marvel's villains feature some of the least live-action friendly designs in the comic universe. Baron Zemo, however, isn't exactly one of them. His full suit is a bit much for the MCU, but his general color scheme and theming should have been fairly easy to adapt."
For what it's worth, I'm sorry.
Malekith has been plaguing the God of Thunder in the comics for decades, so fans were looking forward to his live-action debut in Thor: The Dark World. Played by Christopher Eccleston, the cinematic version of Malekith and his Dark Elf brethren have been in suspended animation for a millennia following a battle with Odin's father and the Asgardians. However, once Jane Foster is exposed to the ether, Malekith and his army are reawakened. The ensuing attack on Asgard leads to the murder of Thor's mother, Frigga. Thor ultimately thwarts Malekith with the help of his brother Loki. Despite being played by the immensely talented Eccleston, Malekith has gone down as one of the worst MCU villains ever. Not only was he devoid of personality or a compelling arc, he looked absolutely nothing like his comic book counterpart. Instead of the sinister black and white face and wild heavy metal hairdo, the audience received a strange-looking humanoid with pale skin and tied-back hair. Screen Rant's Quinn Lewandowski said, "Malekith spent most of the movie with bright white skin and hair that washed out visual definition, only to receive a climactic burn somewhat mirroring his two-toned comic appearance. Instead, all we got was a tiny tease of what the character could have been, but that amounted to little more than an insult to comic book fans."